all you wonderful people out there in the dark, thank you again for checking in. You know, the other day I was driving along and thinking, as I often do, and it often occurs to me how many things we sort of take for granted in our lives during the course of a day. And a perfect example of that is the tire. Whether you drive a Bugatti Veyron or a Chevy Vega, one of the most important things you can purchase is tires. After all, they're what keep you on the road. And I'm always fascinated at the number of people who spend as little as possible on the very thing that can keep you alive. But that's sort of a different conversation for a different day. What occurred to me was, why do we call it a tire? Well, I'm going to share that with you. But first, a little history. So, I don't know, about 3500 BC, man basically invented the wheel. Probably first, I would think it was probably stone, and then eventually, a solid piece of wood, and eventually a carved piece of wood, and then as we moved down the road, we added leather, and eventually iron, which became steel. And workers that were known as wheelwrights, they would take that steel and put it in a forge to heat that metal up, and they would cover that wood wheel and then drench it to quench that steel, and it would shrink tight around that wood wheel. As a matter of fact, right there is an old Pontiac car wheel. The wheel itself is made of wood. Take a look at a couple of these pictures. It's a close-up of this tire that sits underneath my dining room table. Take a look right here. Did you see the steel that went around that curved piece of wood? So there's not the earliest version of that tire, because obviously that's designed to have a rubber tube tire placed around that, but the earliest tires, it would have just been a piece of steel. Well, and as I just said, that lends itself somewhere down the road to the earliest tires being solid rubber for a little bit of cushioning, I suppose, certainly better than steel and leather, but part of the problem is rubber doesn't last terribly long, even in solid form. But in about 1845, this British cat named Thomas Hancock, and actually an American entrepreneur named Charles Goodyear, just weeks apart from each other, I'm not sure exactly, but we'll say 2 weeks apart, they both filed patents for the vulcanization of rubber. And what that is, without getting too deep into the weeds, is essentially taking some of the components that makes rubber, adding polymers, sulfur, and some other products, makes the rubber itself less sticky, much stronger, and maybe a hair more cushion. Now, just a couple years later, this Scottish cat named Robert William Thomson, well, he basically invents the first pneumatic tire, though it never went into production. Now, a pneumatic tire, obviously, it's no longer a piece of solid rubber. It's now a tire that can have a tube placed in between the steel and that hard rubber to provide even more cushion. But in 1847, it never really went into production, but he did file a patent for it. Now, in 1888, in Ireland, this cat who's a veterinarian, his name, John Dunlop, or Dunlop, I suppose. Well, he's got a kid that rides his tricycle around, and I guess the roads are rough, and he keeps getting headaches. So he eventually works with this other guy, and he invents also and patents a quote-unquote pneumatic tire for his kid's tricycle, and eventually it goes into production for tricycles, bicycles, and other carts and various things of that nature. Now, I'll say unfortunately, but it doesn't really matter, because everyone knows who Dunlop is, and no one's ever heard of Robert Thomson. But in 1892, Mr. Dunlop's patent is voided for the pneumatic tire because they realized that, 40 years earlier, that Scottish cat, Mr. Thompson, had already invented it. Needless to say, Dunlop goes on, Dunlop Tire Company still exists today. Now in 1895, this French cat named Andre Michelin and his brother, well, they're the first guys to put a pneumatic tire on what's then known as a horseless carriage, today's car. Previously to that, we're just using carts and again, bicycles and things of that nature, pneumatic tires with the tube, etc., etc. Ironic side note is Charles Goodyear actually, he dies bankrupt, basically a pauper, never realizing that the company he started in Akron, Ohio would go on to be, well, it still exists today. The corporate office is still in Akron. Goodyear Tire, I think one of the largest supplier of tires, certainly in the country, if not the world. Where was I? 1895, we talked about Michelin. So along about 1903, Goodyear, they invent the first tubeless tire. So now we've got some bicycles and carts that no longer need the tube. They figured out how to take that tire with the steel rim and get it to hold a certain amount of air. I don't know how much pressure, not a lot, but enough to have a tubeless tire. And about 1908, what is known as groove tires, or today what we would call tread for tires, is developed. Up to that point, the tires were essentially smooth, which must have made them slippery as shit in the rain. Anyway, then in 1910, a guy named B.F. Goodrich, well, he adds carbon black to tires. Now, where have you heard carbon black before? You've heard it from me. I'm always yammering about it. Carbon black, it's in everything. Now, what makes carbon black so important to the tire is two things. Prior to 1910, rubber is white, it's not black. Well, it's off-white, like eggshell white. And they were adding zinc and other chemicals to rubber, which continued it to be even a quote-unquote whiter than just natural rubber would be. They add carbon black, which does two things. It makes the tire stronger, and it makes the tires black. Carbon black, it's in everything. Well, about 1920, Bayer, yes, that Bayer, they're working to develop basically synthetic rubber, the very synthetic rubber that we still use today, at least in one form or another, because obviously tires are becoming more and more popular. And actually, I think in 1937, the very first synthetic tire is developed, and the chemical they sort of use, it's called chemigum. 1946, Michelin, they developed the first radial tire. Now this is a tire that obviously has steel in it, making it stronger, much, much stronger than the old bias ply tire. They outperform everything, and in Europe, it revolutionizes the tire market, 1946. Now, we don't really get into radial tires until 1968, because I'm sure the, American exceptionalism, it took us 20 years to figure it out. But anyway, 1968, the United States started using radial tires. It had become popular. In 1947, the tubeless tires for cars are basically official. So it took quite a few years. What was it, 1903. So it took 40 some years to go from tubeless tires of bicycles to tubeless tires for automobiles and trucks, to figure out a way to get that seal around the metal rim to hold the kind of pressure it takes for trucks and cars and things of that nature. But anyway, probably the next big leaps are going to be in the 80s. Well, like 1979, the first run flats come out that allow the tire to continue to hold its form for 45 or 50 miles. A little bit of a rougher ride, but changes the way tires sort of work. And actually in 2012, companies start to develop, they're called NPT tires, if you will, non-pneumatic tires, where they don't have a tube and they don't have air. So that's probably the future. And hopefully the tread life, obviously, as time has gone on, or the life of the tire has grown exponentially, because in this country, we dispose of about 285 million tires a year. 285 million tires. Slow down, you're burning up those tires. But anyway, we need to get back to my original question to myself. Why are they called tires? I'm gonna tell you. I asked Sancho. Sancho didn't know. Isn't that right, Sancho? Exactly. He didn't know. Why are they called tires? Well, in about 1300, somewhere about that time, they considered, when you're putting that metal around the wheel and you're putting that solid piece of rubber, that was considered a tire, dressing the cart. The term attire became tire. Like your attire for the suit. You put what attire are you wearing today? That's actually where it comes from. In 1300, putting that rim and that rubber onto your cart, it was considered or looked at as the dressing for that, I don't want to say vehicle, but dressing for that cart. It was the attire, and attire became tire. T-I-R-E or T-Y-R-E if you're from Britain. Either way, that's why they're called tires. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that interesting? I thought so. And again, carbon black. Carbon black. It's in everything. So important. Anyway, I thought you'd get a kick out of that. I hope you did. I had fun learning about it. So do some research. Dig around if you're interested in the vulcanization of tires, how rubber is made, where it comes from, the trees and plants that develop it, and what we do with used tires. We don't bury them like we used to. We're doing a much better job of trying to recycle them, but we've got a long ways to go. Anyway, in this world, when you could be anything you want to be, you be kind, you be humble, you be forgiving, and you be melting snow. Bye-bye.